So welcome everybody to a new STC webinar number 9 this week. We've got Oliver Bridge and Natasha Teeling presenting from GT. So we're very much going to focus around sort of business planning today, which should be fascinating. As you all know, this is part of a series of webinars that we're hosting. So every Thursday at 11, we put on a webinar. Obviously, the future webinars are all down on our website, so you can sort of check what's coming next. You know, we've got 2 different webinars coming up related to cybersecurity. One focused around building business resilience, one about sort of cyber risk and opportunities in your supply chain. We're also having an update webinar on the furloughing scheme and the redundancy rules and things coming in, so that's in the pipelines. We just got confirmation this morning that Innovate UK is going to do a webinar with us as well, all about grant funding and how to apply and the deadlines and what's available and things. And then we're also doing one focused around finding competitive advantage, so very much a business strategy focused webinar as well. So these are all the ones that we've got planned. There's more coming in all the time, and we're adding more to that all the time as well. So please keep a lookout for those on the website. Obviously, we record these as well, so all the previous ones are available to view on our YouTube channel. So if you're interested in any of the subjects that we covered before, then please sort of come back there. Or if you want to have a catch up on this particular one, if all goes well, then by the end of the day, this will be uploaded to YouTube, so you can always check back. But that's kind of it for me. So I'll now hand over to Oliver to run us through the presentation. What we normally do is we'll allow Oliver and Natasha to run through the presentation. If you have any questions or anything, save them until afterwards, because then we'll open it up for a question and answer session, and then you all have the opportunity to ask the questions that you want to ask, and make sure that you walk away with all the information that you possibly can from today's session. So yeah, with that, over to Oliver and Natasha.
Thanks very much, Pim, and welcome. So Natasha and I are going to talk today a bit about business planning. Just a quick introductions to see if we can get this working. Look, there we go. So my name's Ollie Bridge. I head up the operations team for Grant Thornton in the UK. And with me is Natasha Teeling, who heads up our business planning offering that's agnostic across all sectors. We're going to talk to you today a bit about business planning, but before we do that, I would like to just give you a view of how we at Grant Thornton view the current COVID-19 crisis and the way we're thinking about it, because this helps to frame then some of the rest of the conversation. Hopefully in front of you can see the wheel which we use to try and frame the questions and the like around this. The key things here is we've got 3 main phases of time. The first one is called assess, and that's about when you're identifying issues. And then we've got protect, which is where you are making decisions, and then restore, which is looking to the future and then thinking about, well, what does this mean for my business in the future? So we try and think about all of the 6 different lenses, which I'll come to in a second, around these.
Sorry, Ollie, I don't know, can everybody see the slides? I can't see the slides at the moment.
Oh, let me, hold on. Thank you. Let me just share the screen again. Is that working now?
Yeah, that's it.
Brilliant, thank you. Classic things. Right, so hopefully you can see this now. So you can see the assess, protect, restore, and then you've got the 6 lenses around the outside. And just the point around the sort of 3 different time frames, and then the 6 different lenses. And we look at these 6 different lenses across all different businesses, and it does pick up all of the key areas. So working from the top, you've got people, and there's questions around how do you engage and contact your people, and also things around furlough, customers and suppliers, which is making sure your end-to-end supply chain is working, and you're asking questions around how does this affect my customers, how does it affect my suppliers, and some of the decisions you're making. Operations, which is the bit in the middle, which is yourself, how do the decisions you're making affect your business alone? And then liquidity, contingency, and claims. Have you got enough cash in particular? That's been the biggest questions that we've been asked over this time. And ensuring that your cash flow is modelled in the future. And then technology, particularly where we're working from home. There's been a lot of questions around security and how do you protect your own business as well as yourselves from making sure you don't share the wrong type of information in the wrong type of way. And the last one is regulatory. So obviously there are lots of regulations that are still continuing throughout this, and they need to be adhered to. Such even straightforward things such as audits and the like. So that's the way that we look at the current crisis. And today we're going to talk about business planning. And business planning actually covers all of these elements here, because we are talking about how do you think about your business as you move forward, and making sure that you can satisfy third-party stakeholders that your business is in a good state. So moving on. So a couple of things about business planning. First and foremost, there's a couple of polls we've taken recently, and the first one was around businesses that are looking forward to the future. And we asked it only a few weeks ago, and the question was, where do you see yourself? Do you see yourself in the assess, the protect, or the restore phase? So that's, are you still looking at issues? Are you still making decisions? Or are you looking to the future and looking to how you build your business back up again? And interestingly, even a couple of weeks ago, 75% of businesses were looking at that restore phase. And they were looking at, what does my business look like in the future? So another poll that we also took was about businesses that are changing. And the question was around, how do you feel your business is going to change after the crisis? And 87% of participants said their business will change to some degree or another. They won't be exactly the same when it starts to move again in the same sort of way. Of which, of that 87%, half of those said that their business would probably change significantly. So we are seeing across all the businesses that we've been talking to a significant level of, I suppose, anxiety to an extent, but a concern about, what does this all mean for my business, and how do I change? And then how do I also then satisfy or help people get comfortable that this is the right thing to do in the future, and I've still got a good ongoing business. So today, Natasha and I are going to talk a bit about business planning, and particularly around some of the more practical tips. We're going to talk about some of the assumptions that have been reevaluated, and we found for most businesses, nearly every assumption they've made around their existing business plan has been reevaluated to some degree, or at least retested to some degree or another. And then the question around, is there an immediate need to update or create your business plan? Many businesses have been pulling their business plans out, dusting them off again, and looking at them again to be able to say, does this still work? Is there other opportunities that I can take, or are there additional risks unless I do something a bit differently? Generally speaking, we're not talking about business plans that you may put together on a regular basis internally for your business. This is more applicable to plans that are for third parties, because they're the ones that Natasha and I tend to get involved in more. And those sorts of business plans may go to government funding, or when you're applying to lenders or banks, or when there's communication to stakeholders such as trade unions. Even just to formalise a recovery plan, or prepare for a sales process or some sort of transaction. So they're the sorts of ones where we see more formal business plans used. However, most of the conversation will still be applicable to normal business plans as well. We do find, though, that for more formal business plans, they do tend to need a faster turnaround. Most businesses have limited level of resource to do something quite so detailed. But they also need a dynamic, integrated cash flow and balance sheet, normally for about a 3-year period. And that is really important, because particularly for government funding or banks or other lenders, where you've really got to justify from a numbers perspective what the output looks like. We also find that more formal business plans need to articulate a story of some sort too. It needs to ensure that people who aren't familiar with your business or your sector or sometimes anything about what you do, they can understand in a relatively simplistic way how you make money, how your business operates, why you exist as a business, and be able to articulate that story. Sometimes isn't that easy when you're so close to the coalface of it. In addition, some independent scrutiny is sometimes needed, particularly around transactions or lenders where there may be a diligence process that goes with it. So what I'd like to do is, we've got a couple of polls throughout this presentation. So I'd just like to bring up the first poll. We've got a limited number of people on the call, but I'm sure we'll get some sort of good indication here. So Pim, could you just bring up the first poll, please? Does that come up? Excellent. So the first one is around, is your business considering updating their business plan? So if you can answer no, I don't think it's been updated. Yes, just for internal stakeholders. Yes, for both internal and external stakeholders, or I'm not sure. Just give you a few seconds to do that.
At the moment, we're at 6 out of 8 people who replied.
Okay.
I'm guessing that you, Oliver, and Natasha haven't. So
no.
Shall we end it there and share the results?
Yep, go on then.
There we are.
Okay. Even for a relatively small number of a sample size, that's quite similar to we've seen elsewhere, where most people are having to do something for an internal and an external stakeholder. We normally get a few more internals, but I think that does show, generally speaking, it's a similar line with many times we've done this poll before, where you've got a lot of people are looking at their plans. So let me close that.
Yeah.
And then move on to the next page. So with business plans, we look at them in this type of way. So you can see there are three different areas here about the market and the sort of here and now, and then you've got the critical strategic considerations and the financial viability as well. So we're working with a number of clients on these types of business plans. We find that there is no single structure. So we've tried to put something here that articulates most of the areas that we talk about, but there is no real single structure to it, because you need to adapt your business plan to the story that you're trying to communicate at the time. The key thing is that you've got an agile business plan that you can change, and that you've got multiple scenarios that you considered, and you're continuously reviewing that against the different scenarios. The reason we say that is that, as I'm sure everybody's aware on this call, the climate is changing significantly on a day-by-day or week-by-week basis. So, for example, at the weekend, there was discussions around when shops might open, and they might open in the middle of June, subject to a number of tests. So these are a really good example where you need to be thinking about, well, if it opens up on target, what does that mean for me? If they open up later, what does that mean for me? And exactly the same way with a number of different areas, depending on the sector you're obviously working in. Another point that we always make about business plans is whatever you do, make sure you've written something down. It's really important that, because it allows you to then review it, but also it allows other people to review the latest version, so that everybody can see the sort of one version of the truth, and it's been articulated in a way that you can easily communicate to multiple people very, very quickly. We see a lot of people say, yes, I've got my business plan, I know exactly what it is, it's absolutely fine. but they haven't written it down, and that means that the communication gets lost very, very quickly. So first and foremost, if I work down the 3 areas you can see here, the first one is around sort of new normal. And these are around your base assumptions for your market. And this is where we always tend to start. There are a few things that have particularly influenced many business assumptions. And the first and foremost one is around lockdown rules and social distancing. We found with businesses we've talked to is that the social distancing measures in place, this will be no surprise to people on the call here, is that it's caused an enormous amount of disruption and inefficiency in operations or in businesses, whether that's because the office space that used to maybe house 4 or 5 people can now maybe only house 2 or 3, or simply because you're having to operate a one-way system all the way around your factory, and that results in people having to spend longer doing things, or it's just simply more cleaning. But that does mean that some of your base efficiency assumptions in your financial model are probably now wrong, unless you've updated them or looked at the social distancing measures you need to put in place. The next one's around the market. I'll touch on these in a little bit more on the next slide, but it is about when do the restrictions start to lift. And now we are seeing some of them start to lift already in some sectors. Interestingly, bars, clubs, pubs, I haven't seen any news on those yet, but shops, there looks like there is news. And then we've got some car dealerships and the like are looking to open next week. However, all at the same sort of social distancing rules. The next one is around consumer and customer behaviour. We are seeing there are lots of sometimes small things, but sometimes large things that customers and consumers are changing, which is having quite an impact on businesses. And it might be something simple as order sizes. We're seeing some businesses that are wanting smaller order sizes for some of the products that they're ordering, maybe because they've not got the demand to the level it was before, or they simply want to reduce the level of cash that they're spending. But then also, if you look at consumers, we're expecting to see more online sales. Car dealerships are a great example of this, where traditionally you would go to a car dealership because you want to look at a car, maybe want to drive it, and inspect it in the metal. However, more and more sales are starting to go online, and I think that's true across many industries. But also, what are your competitors doing? This is one that we feel is really quite important, because we found for some businesses their competitors have treated their customers maybe in a slightly better way, or maybe slightly in a worse way. Some have cancelled orders, but they also could be consolidating, and there might be strategic moves that some of them are making in the market that will impact you at some point. So keeping an eye on that will also be important to your business plan. And then if we work down into the strategic considerations, once you've looked at your market, what does that mean for your business? So the first one is around researching and to identify your target markets and geographies. So what does that mean? Have they changed? Should you be looking towards Europe more? Should you be looking towards parts of the UK more? How does the change in your consumer behaviours that you've identified impact your target markets and where you operate? And then look at your competitive advantage. Does it still exist for you? Does your business need to operate in a different way to ensure that you've got a competitive advantage still, or you're maximising your competitive advantage? And then also checking your business model still fits. So the way you operate today, is it going to be different tomorrow? And a great example of that, particularly around social distancing, is offices. We're hearing from a lot of people that they are starting to let people just simply work from home, in some case for a very, very long extended period of time. And lots of businesses aren't actually looking to bring their people back into the office for maybe a good 12 months or so, simply because it's working quite well. There's a good level of flexibility for employees, and there's no real need to change that, give or take some maybe some data or access related concerns. And then finally, it's tying all that together in the finances, making sure that you take your revenue line, you understand your cost line, you understand your margins, and then making sure that actually your business still makes money and is financially viable for the future. So we'll talk about these in a little bit more detail. And I'm going to go on to the next slide. He says, there we go. And before I hand over to Natasha, I'm just going to talk to you a bit about the different types of models that we're seeing in the market at the moment. So if I start in the top left, you're seeing this large amount of demand that's coming up, and then we're expecting it to drop off. And these revenue models here, it really does vary by business, and it varies by sector. We're even finding in the same sectors, but different businesses having different revenue curves so far. So if you look at the top left one, it's a good example. You would expect something like food or supermarkets to be acting in this sort of way. There's a big spike. People aren't going to restaurants, they can't eat elsewhere, so they're shopping more at their local supermarkets, but that will tail down again at some point. If I go to the bottom left, where you see the sort of U shape, that's probably a good example of maybe automotive in some areas where there's a real sharp dip, and then it will come back slowly as people start to spend more money again. And then maybe in the top right, where it's a much sharper U, where the dips come off and it's been quite flat along the bottom, and then suddenly it comes back again quite quickly. DIY is probably a great example of that, where if you try to go to your local B&Q or similar, there's a long queues for most of them over the bank holiday weekend. The middle on the right hand side, where it looks like there's no impact, typically you find utilities type companies would be seeing that as well. But the one we all want to avoid, of course, is in the bottom right hand corner, which is a sort of double dip, where you see some sort of relief for businesses as they come back out and demand starts building again, and then either it gets locked down or people get scared to maybe visit or go to, for example, could be restaurants. So when you're looking at your different business models, this is a good example of what does my demand look like and how do I model that. So I'm going to hand over to Natasha now to talk a bit about the strategic objectives and also financial modelling too.
Thanks, Ollie. Okay, if we just go to the next slide. Okay, so as Ollie's mentioned there, it's incredibly unpredictable and changing environment, and we're not really clear of the full impact of the change that is still to come at the moment. So here I'll talk about 3 key strategic considerations, which I would say apply to any business planning process. So first of all, we've got target markets and geographies. In our experience, this is key for building your revenue assumptions and an understanding of the external market in which you and your customers are operating. And it gives a strong basis to your top line projections. So you should really be considering things like short-term and lasting impacts for your customers, any change to your go-to-market approach, and any impact on your key sectors. And then we look at commercial strategy and competitive advantage. So Ollie mentioned briefly competition on the previous slides. So in our experience, this supports the revenue story. It'll explain why you will win in your chosen markets and geographies, the customer profile that you'll need, the product profile, and how you'll go about accessing those markets. In this environment, you could be considering, is your USP still relevant? How will you beat your competition in the new normal? Does your pricing structure remain relevant? Are there any major market movements or competitive pressures that you're seeing? Does your product profile remain as it is currently, or does it need to change? And then we have the business model. So this element of the business plan provides the opportunity to really sell the capabilities and the capacity of the business and its people. So you can look at how you'll deliver the top line from a cost perspective while maintaining a viable bottom line, which is obviously essential. So you should be considering, can you deliver on your perceived competitive advantage? Is your business model flexible enough to adapt to the new normal? So that might be from a people perspective, looking at health and safety requirements. From a cost perspective, looking at limiting the impact of, say, any future lockdowns. And then if you've got to do multiple ramp ups, ramp downs, that can also obviously have a massive effect. If we can go to the next slide, please, Ollie. So once you've established your commercial position and the requirements of your business model in order to deliver on this, there's a need to assess the financial viability of business. So in this changing and very volatile environment that we're seeing at the moment, we cannot stress the importance of a robust integrated financial model enough, as Ollie mentioned previously. So in our view, this should have a few things. It should have the ability to model profit and loss and cash flow. It should be able to model multiple scenarios. You should be able to stress test your key assumptions on an ongoing basis. And you should be able to continually test the financial viability as decisions are made by government or by your customers and suppliers. So, and basically, as you gain more clarity, you can feed that into your business model. It is our view that you should consider financial viability both in the here and now and also in the new normal situation. So what are we experiencing currently? What do we know now? And then in the new normal, what we expect to see over the next 3 years, and considering how we move forward in that new normal. So if we just work through this and start with the top line, so this is in the here and now, it's looking at those committed and highly likely revenues. And then in the new normal, it's looking at that 3-year view of expected revenues. So considering what will need to change, linking it back to the 3 strategic considerations that we discussed on the previous page, and agreeing as a business your 3-year view on those key markets, customers, and sales channels. And then in terms of the bottom line, in the here and now, it's what are those short-term profit requirements to maintain your financial viability? And then in the new normal, how will your cost base change? What will that do to your profit or your cash requirements over the next 3 years? What are your stakeholders looking for, your shareholders, your funders, etc.? And then we have the business model. So in the here and now, it's looking at going for a zero-based budgeting approach, which is the prudent approach at the moment. Continually stress testing the short-term viability. And then in the new normal, what else do we need to change? How do you align to your new market and at what cost? How do you ensure you meet bottom line and new normal requirements? At this point, it'd be good if we could just pull up the second poll, please, Pim. So this is a poll around how many scenarios are you using to model your business at the moment. So assuming that you're looking at your projections going forward and the different scenarios in the new normal.
Right, number is slowly creeping up.
Okay.
Right, I think we're about there. So I'll end it and share.
Okay, so we've got about half of people have been able to answer. So 2 to 4 and 5 or more. I mean, from our experience of doing these webinars on multiple channels, we've seen that 2 to 4 being the most popular number. I think it gives you a chance to show that you're considering the external environment at the moment, you're considering the different risks to your business, and showing that knowledge and that wider consideration. I think 5 to 6 also works. I think when you start to go over that number, it can cause more confusion than it can help. Just when you're communicating to, say, external stakeholders like banks and the government, it can slightly muddy the waters and cause you to have to give a lot of additional explanations. So getting those really clear agreed scenarios that you're focusing on as a business seems to be very useful. Okay, thank you, Pim. Ollie, can we go to the next slide, please? So what should you be thinking about as you begin to develop a formal business plan? Well, in the first instance, who's it for and for what purpose? So are you selling something? Is it to bring credibility? Has it been requested by your banks, for example? And then how do you gather sufficient market data and insight? So this is a standard requirement of any business plan. In our experience, this is vital for giving credibility to your revenue assumptions in the future. In the previous world, we'd have relied on readily available market trend data, you'd have looked at your historic trading patterns, but now, obviously, with the ever-changing environment, it's very difficult to look backwards and rely on that. We have to look at a wider source of insight. So the sort of things that we've been exploring when we've worked with businesses on their plans recently is keeping regular and open communication with customers, suppliers, and employees, monitoring the press closely, obviously, considering other geographies that are ahead of the UK and moving out of lockdown, just seeing what's happening with them, what they're doing, particularly specific to sectors, and then working with non-competitive peers to develop, I guess, an industry-wide view that you can communicate credibly. And then how do you meet the information requirements of the banks and government? So in our experience, these are the most formal types of business plans. They have better defined structures and requirements, and they're most likely to go through a third-party diligence process. In the case of tackling these types of business plans in the current environment, we'd suggest understanding the existing requirements that organisation has, so looking at previous business plans that you may have done for them, or speaking to your representatives to understand what they generally require. Also speaking to those representatives and understanding what others are doing at the moment. So are there being any precedents set by peers, competitive or otherwise? What are they seeing included in business plans at the moment? How are they communicating, etc. And then consider if your assumptions will stand up to due diligence. So really considering if there's a story there that links your top line to your market, for example, goes back to those strategic considerations that we talked about. The numbers in your model need to tie back to that story that you're putting in the front end of the business plan. And any model scenarios as well need to look at those health and safety requirements, the different legislations that Ollie mentioned, making sure that you're able to ramp up and ramp down efficiently, and that any cost that's associated with that is built into those scenarios as well. And then how do you ensure sufficient agility in your business model and financial projections? Well, based on the current environment and the many unknowns and the potential for additional lockdowns, I guess our view is initially you don't need to have all the answers. You can't have all the answers. So you just need to be brave and start to move forwards. Otherwise, things are going to start to stagnate. Obviously, this modelling of potential scenarios as well, you need to consider your cash limits. You need to consider those bottom line requirements from your key stakeholders and make sure you're working within those. And then be prepared for the unexpected, which sounds a bit strange, but I guess it's that ability to make decisions quickly, limit the cost exposure, particularly in the event of additional lockdowns, and just creating those action plans so that people know what to do, who to go to, and can really react in a fast way. So I appreciate we've run through a fair amount at quite a high level there. There's a chance to ask some questions now of Ollie and myself. And yeah, thank you for your time.
Excellent, thank you very much. I mean, just for everybody's sake, I mean, obviously Oliver and Natasha's details are on the screen there. You know, everybody will receive an email with their details on as well. So if you did want to have a follow-up afterwards with them, then obviously that can happen. And we will be sharing the slides with you as well. So all of that is forthcoming. Does anybody? I'll stop the sharing now so we can see people asking questions. Does anybody have any particular questions they wanted to ask? Either like give us a wave or raise a hand or anything like that. I mean, I'm quite happy to kick off because I mean, all of this is really interesting and sounds, very much like, the thing that you also do. I mean, do you have any examples of business that are particularly good at it and have done a good job of it? And, is there maybe sort of almost like a case study that we can learn from a little bit? Do you have any information on that, maybe? Either Ollie or
Natasha?
I mean, we've done this a lot with manufacturing businesses, in particular in the automotive sector. The one thing we do tend to find with the various data requirements that sit within the standards in the automotive sector, there does tend to be excellent data that we can pull from and produce some really interesting forecasts that are backed by credible data, and also because there's often a lot of good market data, for example with IHS and LMC, that we tend to find that we can build a really, really compelling story there. Obviously, that's going to face challenge now with the general unknowns in the sector, but also with that data being less useful probably in the eyes of the banks, while it still gives a view. So I guess we've had to switch more to using relying a little bit on broker notes, using the press, speaking to our contacts within various sectors, not just the automotive sector, who sit on kind of the Department of Trade or otherwise, and getting that inside view of what the trends are looking like. But to be honest, it completely changes by sector, but some of the automotive ones are pretty good.
Right.
Ollie, have you got anything?
Yeah, one of the things I do find is that it's a really useful exercise to go through, because when you're trying to put the business plan together, and if the story doesn't really quite fit, you can quite quickly spot some questions that haven't been answered. A great example around sort of commodities, when we've recently done, is just making sure that what are you the cheapest in the market? Is that your competitive advantage? What is it you're going to market on? And making sure that you can articulate that really well. And if you can't, actually, does that mean you need to do something differently with your business?
Absolutely.
I mean, actually, when you mentioned competitive advantage, I'd just like to point out that one of our future webinars will specifically look at how you can identify and sort of maximize your competitive advantage. So if you're listening to this webinar and go like, oh wow, that sounds great, but how do I do that? Then obviously stay tuned, because we've got a webinar coming up to help you do that. From your answer, when you were talking, Natasha, because obviously there is a huge amount of certainty. So presumably when business planning and making projections and all that sort of stuff, you're inevitably going to have to make some assumptions.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, is there such a thing as what would be a reasonable assumption? So if I had a business and I needed to go to the bank to get some finance in place or whatever, what assumptions could I show up with that they're going to go, yeah, that seems okay, or is inaccurate or whatever? Is there any sort of guidelines or fields or thoughts on that?
What you'll find, especially with banks and government, is they'll be using a firm like ours to test those assumptions that you're making. So what they'll be looking to do is benchmark you, essentially. So any idea you can get from other businesses that are similar to yours, any idea you can get from your customers as to kind of what their assumptions that they're building in, maybe they're happy to work collaboratively with you on those, will definitely help your story. They, at the end of the day, you've got to remember, they don't know your business better than you do. All they have access to is either publicly available information, so that'll be accounts, statutory accounts, and then they'll make assumptions off the back of that, or other business plans that they've seen from similar businesses. So any benchmarking that you can do to check yourself against even other businesses within your portfolio, other locations, or yeah, that's what we generally look at. So other plants around the country, for example, or even in other geographies, looking at things like there's reports on average salaries that you can build in if you need to look at that, inflation, wage rate changes that are predicted for the future, that sort of thing that you can tie back to fairly credible sources of information is always useful. Ollie, have you got any others that
really to go back to the story, isn't it? Because once you've got all that information, can you pull that together into something which sounds right and believable? Because if it does, then someone who doesn't know your sector and doesn't know your business won't have so many questions about it, and that tends to mean it's pretty reliable as well.
Yeah. There's some obvious things that we'd look for when we're diligencing these sorts of plans. So we'd look at the ramp up, we'd always focus on. So what's your ramp up assumptions? How are you matching your volume to your revenue and then your WIP? So making sure that all looks sensible, and as Ollie says, fits that story. That those volume assumptions and that revenue kind of ramp up fits with what's going on in the market at the moment, and is it realistic? Those sort of quick tests are always really useful, and then tying your employee ramp up to meet those volume requirements. They're the sort of quick tests that we'd always do, and it usually exposes some quite silly errors that are usually explained away very quickly, but it's good to just have that sorted up front.
And knowing why your business exists as well. So we talk about the story, and you go through all the data, but if you can articulate why your business is there, what it is that it does that no one else can do, or what is it that does that allows it to survive, is really important. And sometimes that's such an obvious thing that as a business owners miss it, because it's just so obvious. You're too close to the coalface to see it.
And would it be an option as well for people to get in touch with you to like sanity checks up? I mean, is there like a service you offer where you help them through that? Opportunity for a shameless plug here, by the
way. So yeah, part of the offering is that we build business plans for people who are looking to provide them to banks or lenders, and particularly where they've not done it themselves before, or they want to do it so very quickly, or they haven't got the resource to do it. We normally find that a bank, there's some lending that's needed. You've got 4 weeks before you need to get it done, and you just need some external help. That's the sort of typical reasons we get involved, isn't it, Tash? Do you want to add anything?
Absolutely. And then we also have a financial modelling team that help with building the more complex financial models. So it's not a requirement for us to take on that part of a business plan. Often we just do the telling of the story part and making sure that it looks very polished and I guess bank ready. But we also have a financial modelling team that build the very clever dynamic models that allow you to do that scenario modeling, allow you to stress test various assumptions, which we have quite a lot of interest in within our business as well.
Yeah, it makes it bank friendly, doesn't it, or lender friendly in particular.
Excellent. One of the things that kind of occurred to me, because we kind of like we're talking about sort of especially like the hospitality sector, where it's likely that if people resume, it needs to be with social distancing in place and all that sort of stuff. So you may well be in a scenario where you have a restaurant with 40 covers, but you're only allowed 10. And surely it then comes into a point where, with only 10 covers, you can't actually make it work in terms of the numbers, and, it's not really profitable. And I should imagine that in manufacturing or engineering, if you need to operate with a skeleton staff, or you're only allowed so many people in your factory because of social distancing and stuff, that you may encounter difficulties on just kind of like making the finances work. Do you have any information on how other people go about this, or how you can best figure that out and what you can do?
Yeah, look, this is a quite a common problem, and it's not an old problem either, because it's an old problem. It is an old problem as well, because it's really about understanding, particularly look at manufacturing, which products or customers or services actually make you any money. And we find particularly for manufacturing, we've done a lot of work in the past to look at, take automotive as a great example. You might make parts for JLR, you might make parts for Nissan, you might make parts for BMW in Europe or similar. The big question is, when you allocate all of your fixed costs out, which of those products or which of those customers actually make money? So when you're ramping your business back up again, you may be losing money, even though your volume looks quite sensible, because you're not making the profitable parts. And helping businesses understand that is really critical to this, particularly this phase of the recovery, because you want to make sure that you are producing the right parts to make yourself as profitable as possible, so you can generate cash and make sure you can survive yourself. So yes, there's a huge amount of work you can do in there, and it's really getting down into some of the detail of your finances and looking at your activity as well, and which customers' products drive most of the activity in your business. We've seen some great examples where you can simplify your business by removing a whole tail of products and taking a huge amount of cost out at the same time, making your business smaller but actually more profitable.
Yeah, so it really comes down to sort of effective use of data and really understanding it and where it delivers. And almost as if it seems like we thought about that sort of thing, we have a future webinar coming up that deals with exactly that as well. So if anybody's worried about that or wants to know more, we've got something coming up. I just want to make sure that everybody walks away with all the information that they wanted from this session. I mean, obviously there's the ability to follow up with both Oliver and Natasha later on anyway, if you want to. But does anybody have any other questions or anything they want to raise while they still have the opportunity? You should have the ability to unmute yourself. So if you know you want to have a go, then you know.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Chris, Power UK, we're an energy supplier. We supply electricity and gas. We've been trading for nearly 3 years now. We, like everybody, we've seen a reduction in volume over the last few weeks from February to now. We supply across a wide range of industries, businesses. I was interested in what you said about businesses planning to continue with home working long after the lockdown ends. We've got in place almost daily monitoring of the volumes that we're doing and the customers that we have and who's taking what from us. It's very important to us to do that because we have to buy our energy on the back of what we think customers are going to be taking. So we've been working on the principle that most offices will probably start to go back to work within 2 to 3 months, but maybe we might review that now in view of what you said about probably it could well be slower for that market. We do a profit and loss and cash flow. We have a meeting between the directors every Friday to see where we're up to and how we need to realign our plans going forward. So I think it's been quite comforting listening to what you've got to say, that we're doing a lot of things that you're recommending. There's no one answer for us to get it right, projecting what our volumes might be and how quickly they're going to recover. We are spreading a much wider net now within the broker market to bring more business in and spread it even further. So if we don't recover back to the volumes we were before from existing clients, then we can make up the difference from new clients, and that's the way we're going. We have been having a look at the products that we're doing, gas in particular. We know we don't make much money on that, and we'll probably have another good look at it now to see, is it worth it continuing with that as a product? So it's been helpful for us in that respect. Thank you.
No worries. Just on the offices, it's a really interesting one. We've found when speaking to businesses, particularly central London offices, where it's not actually easy to get to without using public transport, there's been a view that the working from home is going to be a lot longer. Where you've got out of town offices where you can drive to, there is enough parking, and you can and they're large enough that you can socially distance more easily, then there is probably going to be a greater return to the offices there. However, the trend that we are seeing at the moment is using what's called an A and B model, where part of the staff, so effectively the staff are split into two. So the A's go in Monday, Tuesday, and the B's go in on Wednesday, Thursday, and sometimes Friday, to try and reduce the amount of people that can transmit COVID-19 between each other. So we do think there'll be people that will return to offices to an extent. The flip side to that, anybody that's vulnerable, critically vulnerable, or have people in their households won't want to return to work. And there is a lot of anxiety out there as well. So there will be people that just simply say, I'm just not going to for a long period of time. So there will be some move back to offices, but it won't be much in central London.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anything from anybody else that I want to raise or ask about? No, if we're all good. Right, so we'll leave it there in terms of the recording. So we'll say goodbye to our YouTube audience. Thank you for watching.